Hey guys, what is up? My name is Mpovukeya, and today I want to show you how to create this cinematic scene in Blender. Right, so the first thing we're going to need to do is to add in some grass. And fortunately for us, this is quite easy. Well, sort of. Shift A, add in a image. I'm going to locate my image. Alright, and then over here, I'm going to activate the transparency and set it down to something like 0.3, just so we can have a look at our model. Shift A, add in a plane, rotate this on the x-axis by 90 degrees. I'm going to scale it down, and I'm just going to zoom in a bit, go into wireframe mode, and we're going to scale this so it's fairly small to something like that. Tab into edit mode, press 2 to select the edge mode. I think it's called the edge mode, I'm not sure what it's called. It's a useful trick. So if you press 1, you can select the vertices, 2 edges, 3 for the faces. So I'm just going to go into the edge selection mode, extrude this, and what we're going to do here is we're basically going to trace out the, what do you call this, damn, I forgot what you call this. Grass blades. We'll call it grass blades. Scale it up, and up to the tip over here, we're gonna scale it down so it's quite thin. So I'm gonna keep doing this until I have the whole shape of this grass. Right, seems like we're done with our grass. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna disable this just so we can have a look at our grass alone. And if we have a look over here, our grass is pretty thin and it doesn't really have much depth to it, let me say. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna Shift R, add an edge loop over here, G to grab this, and then move it over to the y-axis just a bit, so it looks kind of like real grass. You know how grass looks in the real world. So I'm gonna keep doing this with the other grass strands, grass blades, grass strands, and deselect that just to give it some thickness. Right, and this is our grass completed. So now the next thing to do before we make variations of this, I'm going to press A, U, and project from view. So now if we go over here to the UV editing, and I'm going to add my textures. I'm just going to locate that, textures, I'm going to add this one, grass diffuse. And what we're going to do now is we're going to place all these different blades onto this main texture over here. And the trick to do this, actually, I'm gonna, if you go over here into the edit mode and select these faces over here, press A in the UV editor, rotate and position them over here on the texture. And then another thing that we want to do is we actually want these to be straight. So what you can do is you can select these and just move them around. Another useful trick to do is, okay, well, this is a short one, but if you have a look at this one, I'm gonna grab the big strand. Let me just grab that. Yeah, I'm gonna grab the big strand and I'm gonna scale it up. Now, if you have a look over here, this isn't quite straight. So what you can do is you can select, say, these ones, press O to go to proportional editing, and you can rotate it. So now if you have a look, this is quite straight, I'll say. So yes, I'm gonna put this over here, and what I'm actually aiming for is I want these bottom parts over here to be sort of greenish, brownish. That's how I'm putting it over here, and then I want the top to be the greener parts, if that makes sense. So yes, that's what I'm gonna do with pretty much the other strands. Right, so now it seems like we have all our strands placed on this UV island. So the next thing to do would be to add in a texture just before we duplicate it. So I'm gonna go over here to the material tab and I'm gonna add in our diffuse texture. I'm gonna locate that, just wait for that to load, textures, diffuse texture. And then another thing I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna split this up, which you can do by literally just going here and you see how my cursor is right now, so let me put it right here. You see how it is, and then if I go over here to the corner, it makes a plus icon, and once it does that, you just drag that and it opens up another tab for you. Just thought I should mention that for you. So I'm just gonna go to the shader editor and I am going to click on my node here, Control T, and this will only work if you have the node Wangler add-on. So just go to your preferences and tick that checkbox. I'm gonna Shift D, duplicate this, grab my vector output and put it into my texture. And I'm gonna add a translucent texture. And to make this work, just gonna grab that, put it there. I'm gonna Shift A, add in a mix texture, and Shift A again and add in a translucent BSDF. And I'm just gonna plug this in like that, and then also not forgetting the color output. And now, right, my computer's a bit slow. And now if we have a look at that, our texture is applied. So if you want to have a look at this properly, you can click this icon, and without setting up any of your lights, you can just use the HDRs inside Blender itself. So now if you have a look at it, this is our grass, but now the problem is this is flat. If you have a look at it, this is razor sharp. So the next thing to do, I would say, is rotate each strand and add some sort of rotation to it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select these ones, with proportional editing on, just gonna rotate these, move them around, and until I get something that looks a bit more realistic, the way that grass behaves and in the real life, in the real world, real life. Yeah, so I'm just gonna keep rotating these. Alright, I'm okay with this. What you can do, because I don't really have that much time, I'm just gonna be using this one strand. But what you can do, and what I've done in my other file, was I made variations. I think I made about 8 variations of this one strand. So just Shift D, duplicate it, move it around, and just move around these different vertices to give it some variation. Alright, so now we're gonna place this into a particle system. So I'm gonna Shift A, add in a plane, move it a bit to the side, like that. I'm just gonna close this, it's a bit annoying. And I'm gonna subdivide this just a few times, something like this I'd say is okay. And I'm gonna add a particle system to this. I think about 40 should be enough for the particle system, and I'm gonna select hair. So if you go over here in the render tab, I'm gonna click over here where it says render as, and I'm gonna select objects, and I'm going to select the object that I made. Now I said that I did use multiple strands in my render. So what you can do also is just create a collection and move your different strands into that one collection. And then over here, instead of saying object, you can say collection, and then it'll use those different strands. But as I said, I'll be using this one strand. Then what I'm gonna do is over here, I'm gonna select these vertices, and I'm gonna add a vertex group. So click assign to add that, and over back into the particle settings, I'm gonna look for vertex group, and where it says density, I'm gonna add my group. All right, so what I've done is I've selected advanced and rotation, and let me shift over into the rendered mode, and we're gonna play with these values here. So what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna select normal tangents and play with the randomized phase, and this is the result that we'll get. I'm just gonna play with these values, and what we want to make is sort of like a clump of grass. I think this should be okay. Something like this is okay, but just play with these values and make different variations. And I'm gonna take this, Shift D, move it over into the X, and before you change anything here, you're gonna need to press this 2 icon, because okay, wait, let me undo that and let me show you something. If you change this over here, it's also gonna change the one next to it. So you're gonna need to press this 2 icon before you change anything. And I'm just gonna change the seed, and I'm gonna add some more particles. For this one, I'm gonna add 70. Yes, and basically you're just gonna make some variations to this, and I think this should be okay for us. I'm gonna apply everything. I'm gonna convert everything, delete the plane, and then select your whole particles, your whole grass patch, go to object and go to relations, single user, object, and data. And I'm gonna do this for all the other grass patches. Then I'm gonna select these, Control J to join them. Right, so now everything is joined together, and these are the patches that we're going to use for the particle simulation. All right, so now the next step is to actually make our hill. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to move everything that we have here into its own collection, and I'm going to call this grass set. Alright, so we can hide that for now since we're not going to need it. Shift A, add in a cube, scale it up on the x-axis, and then scale it up on the y and x-axis by pressing Shift Z, and that should be okay. I'm going to add in some loops, and I'm going to add in some more loops over here. It seems like we're going to need to scale this up just a bit on the y-axis. So I'm going to grab everything, scale it on the y-axis like so. And then I'm going to add in a subdivision surface, and I'm going to apply that. What I'm going to do now is I want to sculpt over this. This is going to give us our hill. So I'm going to move into sculpt mode. And so if you have a look over here, it gives us this message saying that we need to apply. So just Shift A, apply the scale, and go back into editing mode, sculpting mode, and I'm gonna soften these edges up a bit. And I want to make something that looks like a hill. So I'm just gonna sculpt that very quick. Looking at that, that is good enough to be our hill. So what I've noticed is we're not going to really use these vertices, so I'd like to delete them. So I'm going to go into edit mode, wireframe. I'm going to press 1, and I'm going to delete these vertices over there. All right, so this is what we have now. And then we're gonna make a particle system. But first, what I wanna do is I wanna add in a camera just so I can block out my entire scene. So I'm gonna Shift A, add in a camera, Control Alt 0, and I'm gonna position this camera something that looks nice, cinematic is what I'm going for right here. So something, move this down. I think I'm gonna scale this a bit on the x-axis just so it fills up the whole frame. And I think this should be okay. All right, so now we're ready to put in our particles. So if we go into the particle tab and add in a new particle system here, just like we've done with the previous one, and what we're gonna need is we're gonna need to select collection just so we emit our grass collection onto this patch. So if we select our grass sets, and if you have a look, we already have our lovely grass. What you can do is you can just increase these this amount, and I'm gonna go into advanced just so I can play a bit with the rotation. And I'm gonna play a bit with this rotation, and until I found something that I like. Alright, so one thing I've also noticed now is we are getting grass on this side. So we're not necessarily gonna see the grass on this side. We're gonna see the grass in front of the camera. So I'm gonna go into weight paint mode, and I'm gonna paint where I want my grass to be. So just paint out. I'm gonna go into camera, into the camera view, and paint out wherever the camera is looking at. And this should be okay. So I'm gonna go back into object mode, and if you go down just like we done with the previous grass clump, I'm gonna select the group inside the vertex density tab, and if you have a look, we already have our clumps of grass over this. So what you can also do is you can increase the scale. I think this should be okay. Just gonna increase it a bit more. Technically this should be okay because we won't be seeing much of the grass. So I just wanna separate this object right here from the background by having these sort of textures over there. So I think this should be okay. If we select this object over here, our ground object, and we can give this a material of black, because as I'm saying, we won't be seeing much of this. Just give us a black material. All right, now the next thing to do would be to add in our image, our sky image. So Shift A, images is planes. You're gonna need to have that activated in the add-ons, add-ons, and we're gonna locate our texture. This is the texture I'll be using. I found this on Pixabay. Um, yeah, this is the image I'll be using. And I'm gonna scale it up. Scale it up until it covers the entire camera, and then we're also gonna need to move it back a bit. So I'm gonna go into the top view, G, Y, move it back, something like this. Maybe a bit further. And then we're gonna scale it up again. All right. And then one other thing which I want to do is I want to start setting up our environments. So if I go over here, remember what we done last time? We wanted to view it using the scenes lights. I'm just going to disable this and I'm going to start setting up our environments. And this one is pretty easy actually. I'm just going to drag this over here. Open our shader editor. And I want to use this as an animation. So now if we have a look, this is our scene. So one thing I can also say is that our grass is quite bright at this moment and I want it to be dark. So I'm gonna move the strength all the way to something like 0.2, I think should be fine. So now if you have a look, this is looking quite similar to what we want to achieve already. All right, so our scene is almost finished. The next thing to do would be to add in some assets just to bring in some life into the scene. I didn't really model most of these assets. So if you have a look over here, I have a van which I got from Blend Swap. I think, yeah, Blend Swap. Right, so what I done was I made a cube and I parented the whole vehicle to this cube. So I'll just move this over here and you can download this as well on BlendSwap if you'd like to follow on with the tutorial. It's completely free. So I'll just move this over here and just make sure that it is looking great in our camera. And that is looking great. And then another thing which I done, I'll disable the van, and that is this little thing over here, sort of like a board that you see in cases that indicates you where to go and things like that. And this is just basically a cube which I stretched out and rotated it, and these are vertices with a modifier on it, a skin modifier and a subdivision surface. Very easy to make. I want to show you how to do that. No, I don't want to mock your intelligence. So I'll also grab that and I will move that in as well. And I'll bring it somewhere there. Just have a look if it's okay in the camera view. I'll just scale it up a bit and something like that. That should be okay. And I'm gonna enable our van. So now if you have a look at the scene, it looks like it's coming along together. I'm just gonna render it out for you. And this is how it looks. Okay, now our vehicle isn't really clipping with the grass. It looks like it's floating in there. So I'm just gonna bring that down just a little bit to something like that. Now, if we have a look at it, okay, maybe just a bit more. I'm gonna grab this cube and I'm gonna move it down to something like this. And that is our scene. Now the next thing to add is the birds. So for the bird, I downloaded a model off of CG Trader, and this was the model I downloaded. I thought that it looked nice already, and what I done was I added in an armature to this. So I extruded in some bones and put them on the joints of where the bones would be on a bird. And And what I done was I extruded the bones out to place them where the joints of the bird is. And I rigged everything. So now if you go into pose mode and move the wing, you can see that it is moving along with the bird. But now you don't have to make this perfect. Like if you have a look at mine, it is kind of clipping in those areas. And also if you move this, you can see that it doesn't really move naturally. I'd say it's not the best rig you can find, but this is what I used, and I think it should be okay for your renders. So just do that. I'm not going to show you how to do that. Once again, the tutorial is quite long enough. If you like a video on that, just leave a comment in the description and I'll do sort of like a basic introduction on how to rig characters. But yeah, this is what I done, and I animated everything. So if you have a look, this is our bird, and I made 3 other variations of this bird moving at different paces and so on. I'll just turn these on so you can have a look. So these are the 3 birds, all flapping in different paces, different speeds, and I will use this for my particle system. And what I'm gonna do for that, I'm gonna go into the camera mode. I'm gonna add in a plane, scale it up, go into top view, and let's have a look. I'm gonna bring the plane about somewhere like that. Let's go back into the camera view. All right, it seems to cover pretty much the whole thing. So I think that should be okay. Actually, no, I'm gonna scale this a bit on the y-axis, so something like that. And we're ready to put in a particle system. So one thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disable these birds just so we don't see them. And I think also the grass, I'm just gonna turn that off over there, just so we can see everything and make the viewport a lot faster. So I'm gonna add a particle system, set the number to 150. I think 150 should be okay. And start at frame 1, end at frame 1 as well. And I'm gonna set the lifetime to something very used. I'm just gonna type in 9 and go into the physics tab and select voids. So right over here in the physics tab, change this from Newtonian to voids, and this will have our birds move them the way we want them. So if you have a look at that, they are moving, but I am playing here at 4 frames per second, so you probably won't be able to see this. So I'm just gonna pause that very quick and let's continue. So over in the render tab, I'm gonna select collection and I am gonna select our bird set. So now if I play this, our birds move. I'm just gonna disable everything just so we can see just our birds. So yeah, right, that plays a lot faster. So if you see, our birds are each moving. So what we also now gonna need to do, if we scroll up a bit and go into our movements, which is inside the physics tab, and we're gonna change the personal airspace to a value I used was 6.7, sorry, 6.7, and we're gonna change the men airspace to I think 0.2. Let's try that. And the men air velocity to the maximum air velocity, we're just gonna move that to something like that. I think should be okay. Oh yes, and another thing which I done was I randomized some of the scales so we can have smaller birds and bigger birds. And just so we also don't see this in our render, I'm gonna uncheck show as emitter. So now if you play this, you can see that our birds are flying. And that is what we were looking for. But I do feel that the birds are a bit small. Let me track this and bring it to something there. I feel like the birds are quite small. Scale it down a bit. So I'm gonna increase the scale until you find something that you're happy with. Let me pause it there. I think this should be an okay scale for me. All right. And then another thing we're gonna do, this is the last thing, I'm just gonna add in a cube, which is going to constrain our birds. It's gonna contain our birds inside of this cube. And I'm gonna go over here and over here and set this as a collision. And we're also gonna disable this from our view. So if you go over here into, I think it's called the object data and visibility, we're just gonna uncheck that in the viewport and renders. And if you now have a look at our scene, right, I realized that there is sort of a mistake that's happening here. I'm not sure if it's my mistake or if it's just a bug in Blender. But if you have a look here, there's this plane that's here in our viewport, which if you press play, you can see that it is still there, even though if we go over here and uncheck this show as emitter icon, it still shows up in our viewport. I don't know, once again, if it's my mistake or a bug, but I just thought I would mention that. It's gonna have a render so you can have a look at that. So yes, as you have a look, it seems like our scene is pretty much complete. Wonderful thing about this is it works perfectly in Eevee and in cycles. So just gonna show you something. This is a problem which you might also run into. If I press play over here, you can see that the birds are flying backwards To fix this issue, you're just gonna have to go to your bird sets, and I'm gonna select these birds and rotate this by 90 degrees on the x-axis. Also, don't forget to check object rotation. So now if you have a look at the birds, they are flying properly, normally, as they would in the real world. And this is pretty much it for the tutorial. I also did add in a character. This is all up to you at this point. I added in a character, which I got from CG Trader as well. I just added the character. I thought it gave the scene something a bit more interesting to look at. But this will be all for me today. If you guys would like to see some more new content, some more interesting content, make sure to subscribe, like, share with your friends, and thanks for watching. I'll be back in the next video.